The judges wouldn't do it. The politicians certainly wouldn't do it. And so this is the Magna Carta moment that I'm talking about. The reason I call it a Magna Carta moment is that one of the clauses of the Magna Carta was that you couldn't be locked up, you couldn't be convicted without the judgment of your peers. And that is a tremendously important safeguard for democracy. There are two reasons it's so important. One, it involves the common sense, the life world of the people. And two, it is so hard to corrupt, whether in a big way with bribes or in this soft cultural way that has meant that people who've perpetrated the outrages of robo-debt, the outrages of the British Post Office system have been so poorly held to account. Hello everyone, I'm here with my colleague and friend Jean Tunny, another episode of Policy Provocations. These are short-ish podcast discussions about various things that are coursing through our minds. I recently published something on my Substack newsletter about one of my favourite topics, deliberative democracy, representing people by lot in the way that they are in juries, as opposed to representing people by election, as we typically do it in Parliament. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to hand over to Jean to take it further.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. Good to be joining you again. So you wrote a very provocative newsletter item, two kinds of democratic logic, imaginative vigour in shaping the world. And you point out that there's potentially a hung parliament coming up in Australia. And one of the ideas that's been advanced by Allegra Spender, a Teal member for Wentworth, is that there should be one of these assemblies, citizens' assemblies, on the tax system. And another one's been proposed on housing. And you've written that it would be nice to see them go ahead, but I'm sceptical they can achieve a lot. So what are your scepticisms there, Nicholas?
So what I'm trying to draw attention to is this. It's really a kind of fault line between me and lots of the people who are fans of citizen assemblies. It's a fault line, but it's a kind of friendly disagreement. It's not that we're enemies or anything like that. I wish them well, and many of them wish me well as well. My concern is that we are looking at citizen assemblies as a sort of a kind of a magic thing that we can do, and we'll get all these issues out on the table and we'll have a great discussion. We'll get some recommendations from citizens, and those recommendations will have many things in them that are, in my opinion, they're going to be useful. Then it goes to the political system, and unfortunately, although the political system will have said, please bring it on and we'll listen to what you have to say, the political system will then go back largely to normal. And the recommendations of the Citizen Assembly will become an issues management thing for the government of the day and the opposition of the day. The opposition of the day, it's a bit of a mistake to expect these people to take positions on things. They will be looking across the aisle at ways they can take advantage of their opponents on things and ways they can avoid really offending powerful people who can give them a hard time. I don't have any magic way around this, but the thing that concerns me is that these citizen assemblies will be held. Some of their recommendations may be adopted, and that will be good, but they will leave no institutional trace. And that's because they're not designed to leave an institutional trace. They're designed to create something for the powers that be. They rehearse a process which is so familiar to us we don't notice it, but it's the same as commoners petitioning the king 500 years ago, which is that the governed, we the people, go to the government, the people who are governing us, and we say, please, can we have this, this, and this? And the government says, well, we'll give you this, we won't give you that. So we can talk about this more, but my feeling is that this won't achieve as much as we might be able to achieve if we thought in a different way, which is, can we build this institution of a citizen assembly? Can we start the process of building it into business as usual?
Gotcha. Okay. So I think that's an interesting point you make. Well, this assembly could come up with some ideas and then there's no real institutional trace. I mean, if you did one on tax, for example, I mean, I know I've seen Allegra Spender's green paper. I think Ken Henry helped her out with that. And there's the idea of...
I did. I was part of a round
did you?
table.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. And it's good, it's good work, and she's to be commended for keeping up the good fight.
Yeah. But just to take one issue, and not that I'm necessarily recommending this, but say the Citizens Assembly said, oh, well, look, these tax concessions to investors, property investors are pretty generous.
Yep.
Let's wind them back. But then that could go to the government, and the government thinks, well, that's all too hard. We tried to do that a while back and we got punished at the polls.
Yep.
That's the sort of thing you have in mind, is it?
Yeah, it is. And I guess let me go on to another related point, which is that Ireland is used as the pin-up boy for these citizen assemblies. It's famous for having had two very famous citizen assemblies which were very successful. Those were on abortion, which was built into the Irish constitution that the island didn't have abortions, and same-sex marriage. And Ireland's very proud of the fact that it was the first country in the world to, by way of popular plebiscite, acknowledge same-sex marriage. Now, Ireland has subsequently become a country that is quite used to having citizen assemblies. And the thing is that when you listen to advocates for citizen assemblies and they come up with Ireland and they tell you how good Ireland is with this, and it's true that Ireland's doing better than we are because people are more familiar with citizen assemblies in Ireland than they are here. And these citizen assemblies, just to be clear, they're chosen by lottery. So they're chosen they're populated, the members of these assemblies are chosen like the members of juries, and we're very familiar with that. Now, as it turns out, it's not possible to identify any Irish citizen assembly that has been anything like as successful as those two citizen assemblies on abortion and same-sex marriage. Why is that? Because those citizen assemblies solved a problem for politicians. In Ireland, a very Catholic country, it was dangerous for politicians to lead on those issues. And so this gave them the ideal opportunity on a simple binary question to, if I might put it in an invidious way, to lead from behind, to orchestrate that assembly. And then they could say, yes, we'll go along with that. They've had numerous citizen assemblies since then, and they've been sometimes helpful, sometimes not very helpful at all. They recently, I think in 2021, had one on gender equality, and they've vacillated and they've done very little on that. So yes, these mechanisms are great if they solve problems for the politicians. I'm more interested in these mechanisms as introducing a different logic into our politics. And if we want to do that, then I think we need to focus on trying to do that rather than imagining that these will easily dissolve very difficult obstacles for elected politicians to deal with.
Yeah. So you write that you believe we're going through a Magna Carta moment, and you talk about, what happened in 1215. So you think we're in a place where we need a radical change, and this is part of that radical change.
I think that's a reasonable way to put it, but I'm a very unusual radical because in politics, radicalism, and of course that refers to getting back down to the roots of things, and radicalism, the way we understand being a radical in politics is that you kind of want a revolution. You want to rapidly change things in a fundamental way. However, I don't know whether you've noticed this, Gene, but I'm not a very powerful person. I can have views, you can have views, and everyone says what my daughter says to me about those views, which is, Dad, no one cares. So I'm after a politics which can acknowledge how bad things are and then adjust our expectations not only to our own relative powerlessness, but also to our ignorance. So I can't tell you 3 rules that'll fix everything. So I want to inject a different logic into the way we're thinking about politics and deliberating on politics. And then I want to prove that up. I want to see it happening. I want to see it happening over time. I want to get experience doing it. I want people to see it happening. And then I want to use the fact that they can see that happening to evolve in a more healthy direction. So yes, radical, but what I want to do, as I'm at pains to point out in the article, is not more radical than anyone else is suggesting, because I'm suggesting that we have a citizen assembly with no power either. So Allegra Spender is saying, let's have a citizen assembly without any power, but so that it can make recommendations. I'm saying, let's have a standing citizen assembly and it has no power either.
Okay, so there are a number of questions that follow on from that. So what does a standing citizens assembly look like? Do we have it in Canberra? Does it have a chamber? Are they how long do the people serve? How many of them are there? Are they paid? Like, there are a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah. So millions of questions. And of course, as someone who wants to change things, the art of this is to be specific enough so people know what the hell I'm talking about, without being so specific that they get the impression that I've got the whole thing designed up, and if there are any changes in my wish list, that somehow it's no good. So firstly, yes, I think people should be paid, because otherwise you won't be able to get the people who you ask to serve in the council to do it. Should it be in Canberra? I think having it in Canberra, I want to establish this thing. So it seems to me there are 2 ways to establish it. One is the traditional way in which government would fund it. And I think that is completely impossible, except at these magic moments when a potential prime minister is desperate to become an actual prime minister, or to remain as the actual prime minister. So that's a crunch point when the system itself opens up and new possibilities open up. That's one possibility. The other possibility is to privately fund it, to philanthropically fund it. I don't think we should talk about, I'm happy we could easily talk about that on another occasion, but here there's this special occasion where the crossbench may go kingmaker, and we know that there are quite a lot of people on the crossbench who like these ideas, because the crossbench in many ways is the closest we have in the current system to some sort of institutionalization of the spirit of the community, saying we want something that's got more to do with us, that's been discussed more within the community, and so on.
Right. And how many people do you need to make the Citizens Assembly work?
I think 50 would be a minimum. 100 would probably be a good idea. And what you would do, so I want to do this. So let's say I'm trying to make this happen for less. Let's say I'm trying to make this happen. I'm trying to run this assembly for some amount of money that is half as much as the House of Representatives or the Senate, or maybe a quarter as much. That gives me probably $50 million a year. If I'm going to do that, I have the money to ask people to give up their jobs and to be members of the Citizen Assembly. I think that's all too dramatic. We're not well organized enough to do that. So what I would like to do is those people who are randomly selected to join this group, I would like to say, we would like you to meet for an introductory period of 4 days a month for the first month, say 4 days, weekend days in the first month. A few of those will be perhaps a long weekend, and they could fly. It doesn't have to be Canberra, but it could be Canberra. They get to know each other. And then we pay them to perhaps do a physical meeting once every month on a weekend, or maybe once every 2 months. But most of the work, once they get to know each other, can be done online, and it can be done. And so someone can keep their own job and then continue to do this job spending, say, 6 hours a week on 4 hours a week or 6 hours a week on 2 or 3 2-hour meetings held over by teleconference during the week.
Right. And what do we get them to deliberate on? Because so Allegra Spender wants to do one on tax reform.
Yeah.
But that's huge, okay? And there's so many different issues there to consider. Would it be on a broad topic like that, or would it be on something specific, say that the government comes up with a tax reform proposal, or are you looking for this body to generate the ideas based on a wide review of different proposals? Are they getting lobbied by different groups? Are they getting academics in to advise them? I'm just trying to think about how this works in practice.
So all of the answers to your questions are it depends, but the animating idea is that this operates as much as it can as a third chamber. It is an advisory chamber. It has no constitutional power. I would like to give it some constitutional power, and we can talk about that. But it has no constitutional power, but it is there. And the writing instructions that I want to give it are you should act as if you were a House of Parliament. And then the immediate question arises, well, we spend a lot less time than the people in Parliament, so we're going to have to let lots of things go through to the keeper, as indeed, essentially, this happens in Parliament itself, where they just agree to rubber stamp various things because the work's been done and they say, yeah, we trust what we've been told about that and so on. So, but that's something that I want to give this body. So this body itself decides what it wants to focus on. If it thinks it's got something to say on tax reform, it can talk about that. But if you think about, I mean, I would imagine that in the lead up to the plebiscite on the Voice, I would imagine that the People's House would have said, we want to hold hearings on the Voice. We want to hear from different parties on the Voice. We would like to make ourselves informed about the Voice so that we can participate in this lawmaking and policy-making process, and so we can embody the considered opinion of the people. Let's say the stage 3 tax cuts. I would imagine that the Citizen Assembly would say, we would like to have a view on that. We would like to share our view on that. We've recently had a lot of deliberations in the Parliament about gambling, advertising, and so on. I would imagine that the Citizen Assembly would want to have something to say about that, and that indeed it's the kind of thing that people would feel quite confident participating in. Tax reform, they might get intimidated fairly quickly. Doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. There are certain things that I think are exceptionally well suited to ordinary people learning, talking, learning from experts, hearing different points of view and coming to a conclusion on. Another one is what drugs should be funded under the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. The pharmaceutical benefit scheme makes expert and Solomonic judgments about who gets funded and who doesn't get funded. And I think it would be democratically useful for ordinary people to hear those expert views and to be part of the process of making those difficult decisions. And maybe they say, look, we should spend more. Maybe they say we should spend less. But that would be a really healthy thing to do. And I would have a great deal of respect for what their view was.
Yeah. And is there a leadership of this group? Will that just be emergent from the group?
Very good question. So this is something I've given a lot of thought to. I first took great notice of a mechanism that was used in the Adelaide citizen jury. We can call it a citizen assembly on nuclear waste about 10 years ago now, I think. And they needed spokespeople because there were 340 in this citizen assembly. And they had a really interesting mechanism for choosing those spokespeople. What they did is they got a small random group of people towards the end of the assembly and they said, please come with us. I think there are about 15 of them. Please come with us. We'll spend an hour talking about the criteria according to which we should choose spokespeople. These were spokespeople to convey the Assembly's views to the Premier. We'll spend an hour doing that, and then we'll spend the next hour identifying those among us who best meet those criteria. I call this bottom-up meritocracy. It doesn't involve an election. It doesn't favor the most articulate or the most self-assertive. It favors those who ordinary people think are the best. And so it's by mechanisms like that that I would like to see the body lead itself internally. And more than that, I would like to see it as people leave the assembly, so that, let's say they spend a year in it and then they're rotated out and new people come in. As they leave, I'd like a process like that to proceed, and some small subset of those people would be identified as the best among them. And I think they would make a great council of elders to help mentor new members. You don't have to give them any power. They would help mentor new members. They would be a repository of the assembly's corporate memory, its traditions. They would have some memory of various crises it will have gone through and so on, just as you have people with a long corporate memory in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So that's a sort of a quick spread of the way I see leadership within that group.
Yeah. And are you concerned about factions emerging in a citizens' assembly?
No. Sorry, I should say, of course, we should think about that. But the experience is that a lot of people who look at this expect that because it's a political body, it will behave in ways that are familiar to the way we see politics being done. And the great mistake of that, and I remember this sort of struck me very viscerally when I just read some of the verbatim quotes of people involved in an Adelaide citizen jury, not the nuclear waste one, another one. And they said, when I went along, I was apprehensive. I thought that people would sort of yell at me and so on. And then when I sat down and I looked at all the people, I saw people like me. Now, some of those people will be more self-assertive. They might make pains of themselves, or even not pains of themselves. They might just operate in ways that we are familiar with in politics. But they are very diluted. If you have a chat over the back fence, it's usually pretty friendly, even if you disagree about things. That's actually can be a tremendous tonic for our democracy. So yes, keep it in mind, but I don't think that will emerge as a big problem in the assembly.
I wonder if you need to keep it constantly refreshed. So what thought have you given to the term that they would serve? How many would you serve for half a year or a year?
So my illustrative number, I've thought about this. I've even gone out to 2 years or 6 years, but and that would be an interesting experiment. But 1 year, 6 months is fine. The one thing I would do is I would stagger the period of refreshment. So if you have 100 people, you have about a third of them leaving. If you're going to turn them over every year, you might have a third leaving every 4 months. And so you've always got people who've got more experience and less experience. That's obviously good for the people with less experience to come in and be mentored by those with more. And then, at least according to the way I think about it, there'd also be a council of leaders there who have quite a lot more experience, even if they wouldn't have any vote. So that's illustrative. You can also do other things. You can one of the things they do in Belgium is so in East Belgium they have a standing citizen assembly in the German-speaking part of Belgium, and they have a council of 50 people, and that council can nominate some terms of interest, some terms of reference, and say we want someone to look at. To give you a concrete example of one of the things they asked about was the quality of nursing in aged care, quality of the workforce and so on in aged care. This was just before COVID. And then another 50 people are randomly assigned to that body. They go and do the work and the report, and then they hand that report back to the original People's Council. There's something very attractive about that, because it's got it's got what is in the literature called the blind break. That is, no one is making recommendations that they're trying to force through anywhere. They're trying to make recommendations that make as much sense as possible to someone like them, because they propose and somebody else just like them disposes of that. And if they come up with eccentric and wacky proposals, then if they're not well argued, if they're not well researched, if they're not well backed, they don't go anywhere. So that's something that's I think very attractive.
Yep, indeed. So can I ask, before we wrap up, what's the rationale for this again? I mean, I know you talk about we're at a Magna Carta moment, and I think there's broad
Yeah.
agreement that there's a lot of, I mean, we see that there are definitely failings with democratic capitalism, so to speak. I mean, your friend Martin Wolf has written a book on the crisis of democratic capitalism. Is this about drawing on the wisdom of crowds, or is it about getting policy that's closer to the preferences of the public? What's this about? What's the
Yeah,
rationale?
good question. Democracy we have harnesses the wisdom of crowds, but it harnesses it in a particular way, which I think a lot of people think has gone toxic. And one of the things that's happened is that as people see their democracies degrade, they think that democracy itself maybe isn't such a great idea. They've all got a similar idea to Churchill, which is, yeah, it mightn't be a great idea. It's just maybe better than anything else we can come up with. And that's a pretty good thought. I'm not after miracles here. But democracy is a many splendid thing. There are many different ways to do it. And I would argue that this fairly deliberate decision that was made in the late 18th century by the founding fathers in America, in the French Revolution, this fairly deliberate decision to build a democracy around elections works for as long as the life world of the people, the culture of a nation stabilizes these structures so that politicians somehow feel the need for what they're saying to kind of ring true in some commonsensical way. Under this system, Winston Churchill went into the wilderness for about a decade arguing a particular thing. Of course, we're now so familiar with this idea that we read articles in the newspaper about how a politician is repositioning themselves on an issue, and so they're coming up with a view which is the opposite of the view they had the previous week. And everyone's happy with that. And this doesn't make any sense, and crazy things are happening. And I believe from evidence, from what I've seen, that the people are pretty rational, and they're also pretty jealous of democracy in the right kind of circumstances. I've seen citizen juries where they don't come together in the sense that they all get lovey-dovey and end up agreeing with each other, or even come up with perfect compromises. But in that context, they gain deep respect for each other as they disagree. And that renews their preparedness to say, well, I disagree with this, but the community thought this, and I'm prepared to back that. And the reason we are so anxious about democracy is that we don't feel that. We feel that this side won because it played a trick, because it cheated. And the reason that side won and played a trick was because the other side would have played a different kind of trick if it hadn't played that trick. So they become professionalized at gaming the system. And people don't game the system when you stick them in a citizen assembly. If you do it well, a lot of people who've had jury service come back from it with quite a lot of respect for the fact that people do their best. And so that's what I mean by a Magna Carta moment. A moment, and I mentioned robo-debt. So robo-debt, for people who are not Australian, if you're British, you would remember the post office, the scandal of the post office, a large government organisation turning on vulnerable, innocent people who are doing their best. And then a series of inquiries take place, and yet no one is held ultimately accountable. None of the people who ran this really held to account. So I think that the Citizen Assembly, an Australian standing Citizen Assembly, would take that matter very seriously. They would say, it wouldn't have any power, but it would say, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Auditor General, release the names of the people responsible for robo-debt. That would be a good thing. I'll just go on to say this, that in the United States, they have terrible problems with gerrymandering. And the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission is fixing that up. So under a citizen-initiated referendum, the people of Michigan voted for ordinary, randomly selected by lottery people from Michigan to be on a Citizens Independent Redistricting Commission, and it was the only thing that cleaned up gerrymandering in Michigan. The judges wouldn't do it. The politicians certainly wouldn't do it. And so this is the Magna Carta moment that I'm talking about. The reason I call it a Magna Carta moment is that one of the clauses of the Magna Carta was that you couldn't be locked up, you couldn't be convicted without the judgment of your peers. And that is a tremendously important safeguard for democracy. And it's one of the reasons, well, there are two reasons it's so important. One, it involves the common sense, the life world of the people. And two, it is so hard to corrupt, whether in a big way with bribes or in this soft cultural way that has meant that people who've perpetrated the outrages of robo-debt, the outrages of the British post office system have been so poorly held to account.
Very good, Nicholas. So let's hope if there is a hung parliament, then the crossbench is able to get an idea like this up. I think it'd be, I'd think of it as an experiment. I think it's worth trying.
Yes, that's very much in my view as well. It's
how
low risk. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work particularly well. That's
Exactly. So any final thoughts?
So I'm that kind of radical. I'm someone who wants to do things that can't go terribly wrong, but introduce a different kind of logic into the way we do things. And all the evidence suggests that different kind of logic could take us through a portal into when people participate in these things, they say, yes, this is what democracy should be about.
Absolutely. Very good. So I'm happy with that. Any final thoughts before
No,
we
that's it.
wrap
That
up?
was my final thought. I tried to give you a good rev up at the end there.
Very good. Well,
Okay.
yeah, all for that.
Thank you
Okay,
very
well done,
much.
Nicholas.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gene.